And so they delivered miniature ships for Alien Romulus. The Corbellon, which is the hauler that the team go up to the space station with. And also right at the beginning of the film, there's a prologue with a probe. They also delivered the probe. Now, let's be really upfront again. I think only 2 miniature shots ended up in the film.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So they actually shot. I didn't know that. I didn't know that there was actually final shots on the film. Okay, I thought it was just never came in. Okay,
Yes.
That's cool.
I'm not sure I know which ones they are. I would love someone to chime in and sort of point them out. This podcast is brought to you by Befores and Afters magazine. Befores and Afters magazine is the monthly print mag from VFX journalist Ian Fales. Go in-depth on key visual effects topics with major VFX supervisors, artists and studios. Each issue covers a different area like creature animation, miniatures, on-set VFX and VFX tools. Find your copy at beforesandafters.com/magazine.
This podcast is also brought to you by HUGOSDESK Nuke Compositing course. Join today to have access to 150 pre-recorded classes, 50 hours of training, using real production assets covering industry standard techniques with over 200 gigs of showreel material and access to a private Discord channel with over 2,300 students. This course is endorsed by Foundry and has access to a Foundry student license paid separately. Join today at hugosdesk.myshopify.com. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to this special VFX Notes bonus episode with me and Hugo. Hey Hugo, how you going?
Hey Ian, how you doing?
I'm really good. If you've already watched the Alien Romulus VFX Notes episode that we've published, fantastic. And this week it's on Alien Romulus and the use of miniature effects.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just going to quickly say, Hugo, I was super excited when I did learn that miniatures were going to be part of this film and were part of this film. I'm always excited when there's miniatures, right?
I had no idea this was even the thing. Until I read your magazine, I had no idea that they even had miniatures. They weren't even thinking about it or even considering them. Because, like, if you look at the film, like, I just assumed it was all CG and it looked, grandiose. And especially because of the type of shots they were handling, like explosions and big scenes and really fast moving. I would never for a million years even consider thinking about miniatures. So I really surprised for that, and I really recommend people listening to the interview. So you got to talk a lot about this, weren't you? About the miniatures.
Yeah, well, it's a curious way that the miniatures kind of became part of the film and then were incorporated. So here's the quick rundown. Of course, it's a film that has both practical and digital effects, and the director, Fede, really wanted to have a certain aesthetic to the film. And I think when he was chatting to visual effects supervisor Eric Barber, who, used to work at Digital Domain and had access to miniatures, right, and did miniatures work early in his career, he knew what miniatures could bring. Also, let's just say it out loud, miniatures have sort of dropped off in a huge way in filmmaking and visual effects. You and I have probably covered a few projects where they seem to have sprung back in action, right? And sometimes they're really, really used like centerpiece shots and centerpiece assets, vehicles, whatever. And sometimes they're used for reference. And I think there's great use of both here in Romulus. That's ultimately what they did.
Yeah, I think a few times that we've covered a few times, of course, on the show, but the two ones that come to mind were the Blade Runner, where they actually have one miniature shot on the film, and we actually talked a lot about that on the episode that we covered with the last Blade Runner. And also, like, often, as you know, and everyone probably watching knows, every time they do a Star Wars show, a film, there's always one miniature or another there. Either because it's an homage, or they try to do it, or they, even on the TV shows, sometimes it happens. So it's still a bit alive and kicking, but it's of course it's a lot less than it used to be. Of course.
Yeah. So in this situation, Eric basically asked around and said who would be the person that could implement miniatures in the film, And the name Ian Hunter came up. Now, Ian Hunter is this legend in the world of miniature effects, and he had a company originally in Los Angeles called Hunter Gratzner, with Matthew Gratzner. That then became New Deal Studios. And oh my gosh, if you could see what New Deal delivered over the years, including on films like Inception, many other Chris Nolan films. I mean, there's almost too many to mention. That they just did incredible work. That company no longer exists, but Ian Hunter still has a consultancy business in miniatures. And actually, just as Alien Romulus was kind of ramping up, he went into business with a company called Pro Machina or Pro Machina. And that's Alec Gillis's company as well, who Alec Gillis is a creature effects person, but he is part of this company called Pro Machina with a few other people, including, I believe, his daughter, Camille, and others. And so they delivered miniature ships for Alien Romulus. The Corbellin, which is the hauler that the team go up to the space station with. And also right at the beginning of the film, there's a prologue with a probe. They also delivered the probe. Now, let's be really upfront again. I think only 2 miniature shots ended up in the film.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So they actually shot. I didn't know that. I didn't know that there was actually final shots on the film. Okay, I thought it was just never came in. Okay,
yes.
That's cool.
I'm not sure I know which ones they are. I would love someone to chime in and sort of point them out. But regardless, they shot all the sequences that were planned as miniature shots. And then, for all the reasons, shot design, moving camera, other things in the scene, many shots of the Corbellin and the probe ended up being, I think, completely digital because the miniatures were scanned and then ILM would create digital versions of these miniatures that were then part of the digital environments and digital assets, digital vehicles in the film. And you will always hear a visual effects supervisor, a production one, but also from a, studio side, ILM side, say having the miniatures, having the scans, having the texture photos is a huge benefit to building digital assets, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because a lot of people don't really realize that the difference that it makes. I don't want to sound like someone, only if you're on set, this, but I really think that a lot of people don't really realize how hard it is to film something or to act to something that doesn't exist at all, or even to light or even to stage something with nothing existing. So one of the most daunting things in the world, like for me at least personally as a VFX super and artist, is when you have the empty grid, on a 3D monitor, like either it be in Maya or Nuke or anywhere, and you just have to start the shot from scratch. And it's quite daunting because you're like, what lens should I use? Okay, how big will be the model? And it's always a bit hard to move forward. And most visual effects artists, they are not cinematographers and they don't have really a culture of cinematography. And so I really find this fascinating because having miniatures on set for shots like this, it is a great starting point. Not only because like you've said, it's not only because it's a starting point to have the textures and the lighting, but also it's a great way to start a creative conversation about how to stage these shots. If you have the DOP, which is the actual DOP of the entire project, and which means the language, the framing, the tempo will all be there. Sometimes this tempo and framing gets lost because, of course, the CG artists are not cinematographers. As much as people can be talented, they can't do everything. And so this is really a team effort. And so having the miniature there means the director and the VFX soup and the cinematographer can stage and frame up with real lenses. They can mimic camera moves and they can really start experimenting with these shots. And I am certain that although almost probably 90% of the shots didn't get used, it became the bedrock foundation for all the other shots. And I think that is why when I look at this film, and we talked about that on the main episode, it is so grounded. Every time we're in space, the shots are slow and the shots are like really magnanimous, and the miniature, like the CG is really dark and it's really silhouetted, and it really looks almost like a miniature, but of course it's moving like a CG object. And so it's super interesting, you know.
And of course the point is that this film is situated in between the first two films, which were the age of using miniatures and optical compositing for their visual effects. So again, it fits into the aesthetic of when this film is meant to be placed. Now, what is also obvious is that it was great reference. ILM, in its breakdowns of its visual effects for Romulus,
they have it there. Yeah.
Has amazing side-by-sides, comparisons of the practical model for the Corbellin and the probe and the digital CG model. And it's really fun to look at those, isn't it? To compare them and see how close they are.
It is. And every time I'm on a company, a VFX company or a studio, whenever we do a project, like having a real object on your table, or even having a prop from a film, or even having anything whatsoever next to you so that you can investigate and look at it and take photos and use as a reference and use a magnifying glass and check things. It is so useful as a texture artist or as a modeler. And so just the sheer fact of having a scan of these models, I am assuming this is like amazing, because they can then pick this up and then build from it, and then they don't have to invent all the ships, and they can still be true to the language of the film. And especially, Ian, it is sometimes I get a bit sad when I see these old school behind the scenes and I see all these really large teams of puppeteers and miniature people and that populated the films from the 80s and the 90s and even all the way to the 2000s. And I'm a bit sad sometimes because I see all of this talent and all of these people kind of like didn't lose their jobs or started doing something else or kind of abandoned the industry whatsoever because we were so obsessed to moving on to CG right away. And there was a phase in the early 2000s where CG was being used too much and it was a bit even abused, as we already talked about on the show a few times. And so it's great to see this because I really think that these people are so talented and they have such experience. They have such a breadth of experience, which is from decades of doing this. And that experience is not easy for a young person on a box, on a 3D application. It's not easy. It's not, no disrespect to the 3D artist, but this is the experience you want to have for on a project so that you can grow with it and you can be inspired by it. And so I thought this was fascinating, and I maybe hopefully like there is more people understanding. I know this is expensive and that this is a lot of work, but it is definitely a great methodology. It's a great methodology. Try to film anything, whatever you film. Maybe we can use it, maybe we can't use it, but at least film something. And I think that's really the methodology that Fede used on this film, and that's why you see the xenomorphs and you see them on suits and you see the radio controlled facehuggers. Most of them were replaced, but they were there and they brought up ideas and creativity and made the film flow from that, So films always film something. I think that should be the motto for all films.
Yes. The one extra aspect, which I didn't have a chance to talk to anyone about when I did interviews for the film, was in the B-roll for shooting in particular the Corbellin, they appeared to shoot it on a stage with an LED wall for lighting, right? They could probably play some pretty close to finished previs or final shots, in progress shots from the film, and give some lighting reference to how how the lights, how the space, how another space station, how takeoff lights and things were affecting the model. I have heard of a few miniature effects shops basically shooting against LED walls for that obvious benefit of interactive lighting. Now, I think there are other challenges, because you're often trying to get multiple passes, right, with miniatures. So you can't always rely on LED wall shooting. But that's an interesting aspect to it as well, that they tried that out and I presume it gave some great interactive lighting.
Yeah, and I mean, that throughout the project they did that. Even on the Xenomorphs, they also have a couple of shots that actually ended up on the film that has also the same kind of LED lighting. I mean, again, nothing special about no, I didn't mean nothing special. What I mean is like it is so common back in the day when they were doing miniatures that they would do retro projections and they would use retro projections to film stuff. So this is just an extension of that, and I think I've seen some amazing work, especially from, if you go through YouTube and you see there's some young people really doing some amazing stuff with rear projections and models and forced perspective. There's a lot of work happening in that sense. A lot of artists are doing that these days to play around with stuff. And yes, it never ended up being used on the film, but I'm certain that it was reviewed and used all the time on dailies and all the time on whenever they were lighting shots or whenever they were checking their shots against real. I'm sure they would always use these shots to just check,
Yeah,
things.
And just to be clear, there were 2 shots. So there's 2 miniature shots. Yeah.
Which we don't know which ones.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this, like, just make sure you leave a comment. Maybe you can let us know which ones it was.
Yeah. Well, that's our little extra piece for everyone on the VFX Notes Patreon. Thank you for your support as we start our new way of doing VFX Notes in seasons, and as we expand the Patreon to have a lot of bonus material. My only little extra thing, just a shout out to Ian Hunter again, is to go and look at his body of work.
Yeah.
The most recent stuff is, of course, Alien Romulus. He also worked on some amazing miniatures for First Man, which got a bit of attention at the time. Of course, the film won Visual Effects Oscar. And he did some incredible work in Quentin Tarantino's film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I'm actually not going to tell you what he did on that, but if you Google Ian Hunter and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think you might be surprised about the miniatures incorporated into that film. So I'll leave you with that, Hugo. Awesome. Bye, everyone.
See you later. Bye.